Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe Pasillo and Joe Rossinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach. Joe, there's a lot of talk lately over the last couple of weeks about UFOs. Tucker Carlson was hammering it over the last couple of years. He had people on his show, obviously a very widely watched show. Now you got some people testifying in front of Congress, and they're talking about this very same thing, the idea of UFOs, which obviously brings up the idea of intelligent life on other planets. What does that mean? How does an individual human being supposed to take that? Well, we have Dr. Paul Thigpen coming back to the show, friend of the show. He was here a couple months ago. We talked about his new book, which we all recommend that you get and you read, Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Catholic Faith, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to have Paul back to talk about this on social media. If you're seeing this on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you're seeing it, please share the video. This is really good information. Share it on Catholic Twitter in particular, and really get it out there. So Joe and I want to know more about this. I want to know what it means for the faith. I'm not going to sit here and say I know everything. We don't know everything. So Dr. Paul Thigpen is going to help us with that. He's an internationally known speaker, best-selling author, award-winning journalist. He's published 60 books, including Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Catholic Faith, Manual for Spiritual Warfare, The Rapture Trap. In addition, Paul's published more than 500 journal and magazine articles in more than 40 religious and secular periodicals, and his work's been circulated worldwide and translated into 16 languages. Joe, you haven't been translated yet into any other languages, have you?
No. I don't even speak English. So
yeah, I know we have a hard enough time with that. We speak Newark.
Well, if you ever need a translator for Southernese, South Georgia, I'll be your helper. Okay?
All right, we're definitely going to take you up on that, Paul. Paul also graduated summa cum laude from Yale University with a BA in Religious Studies, received an MA and PhD in Historical Theology from Emory University. In 2008, he was appointed by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops to their National Advisory Council. He has also served the church as a university theology professor, historian, apologist, evangelist, and catechist. Dr. Paul Thigpen, welcome back to the front line with Joe and Joe, our friend.
Brothers, it is so good to be here with you. Thank you. There's always so much energy in this podcast, that I appreciate your enthusiasm and your engagement. I love being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Now, we don't know what else the audience is going to take away from this, but this is going to be a bundle of energy. Joe Rossinello, where do you want to go?
Well, first I want to say Paul Thigpen not only has a lot to say, he is a true gentleman. Fact. And he's a highly qualified individual. And as Joe rightfully said, he wrote a book on extraterrestrials and our Catholic faith. We had him on the show. And I'll be honest with you, Paul, when I saw these congressional hearings, I immediately thought of you. For those who don't know about the congressional hearings, I'll just give you a little summary. There were 3 former military officials. They sat in front of Congress, and they believed that the government knows more about UFOs than they're basically telling the public. So I guess before we get into the book as well as the hearings themselves, what were your thoughts immediately when you first heard this? I mean, I think a lot of people were rather shocked. As Joe said, Tucker Carlson spoke about it, a lot of news agencies. No matter where you stand on the issue, it is Congress, and they're making such a claim. It's an official hearing. What were your thoughts?
Well, for folks who have followed the topic, there was almost nothing new in the hearings. George Knapp, who's this great journalist, investigative journalist out in Las Vegas, local TV there, but he's been following this subject for years. 36 years ago, he published an article with whistleblowers making all the same claims, not as detailed, but in all the same areas. So this has been out there for a long time, but a campaign of misinformation and dismissal and mockery, which we know from declassified documents that both the Department of Defense and the intelligence community orchestrated from early back in the 40s and 50s. Because of that, then hasn't been taken seriously. So the difference here is that we finally have people taking it seriously and getting not just maybe folks that nobody's ever heard of, but getting people of the quality of these 2 Navy pilots. One's a Top Gun, both of them just top in their field. And then David Grush, who had top secret clearance with the intelligence community. He was a decorated veteran in Afghanistan. He was with several agencies with the U.S. government that would have been putting him in a position to learn about these things. And in fact, he was part of the working group that the DoD had to study UFOs, or as they're calling it now, UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. So no one's been able to claim that he's not who he said he is. They didn't have all the clearances and credentials that he said he has. And again, his claims were not surprising to people who studied it, but surprising to a lot more. And the amazing thing is that finally Congress is taking it seriously, and a whole lot of other people too. The kind of claims he made, there were a lot of things he couldn't say because he was keeping his non-disclosure agreement. But the things that he said that had to be classified, he said, I'll tell Congress, and I've already told some folks in Congress, and I've told the Inspector General of the intelligence community these things, and I'm very happy if the people have clearance to give the details. And that's a pretty amazing place to be right now.
You worry about this being in front of Congress? You're talking about three gentlemen. You say you just talked about their credentials a bit, because Congress is going to politicize everything. Now, I personally, Paul, I'm not going to lie to you or to our audience. I saw some clips of the hearings. Congress is really just nauseating lately, so that's why I try to avoid YouTube clips of when it comes to other topics. But I was worried that they represent a member of the House represents a constituency in their district. And I'm not bashing them. You might have, let's say, somebody who represents a district that is overwhelmingly, let's say, Bible fundamentalists, evangelical Christians, that they don't want to hear it. They don't want to. The politicians to actually get in there, into the dirt, into the weeds, to try to get to some real truth about this. Am I off in my assessment there, Paul?
Well, it's interesting. It's a variety of situations here. First of all, what has been amazing about this hearing and the things there is that it is utterly bipartisan. You had on the same committee sitting next to each other, both asking very serious questions with no partisan thing at all. AOC on the Democratic side and Matt Gaetz, on the Republican side.
That's weird.
Further apart.
Yeah.
But both of them very respectfully, but very directly asking the questions that needed to be asked and cooperating on this. And they're not the only ones. There have been Democrats and Republicans, Marco Rubio, Kristen Gillibrand, and on. So that, yes, you do have, and they have been very careful not to politicize it because they say it's just too important. You've got all this agreement. Having said that, and I applaud them for it. And Tim Burchett, was or Burchett, I guess he pronounces it, from Tennessee. He has probably the kind of district you're talking about, but has still gone forward with it, knowing that there'll be people in his district who say, this is all demons or whatever. But he's gone forward with it. He's an openly an evangelical Christian himself and talks about his faith when he's talking about these things. So you got folks like that, but then you have other folks, I won't mention names, but some folks who seem to be pushing back. And when you check the contributions by supporters in their district and beyond, they have people who, who are big in the aerospace industry, making contributions in their district. And the aerospace industry does not want this information out. And there we could talk about the reasons why. So you got the
Joe,
kind of
if you don't mind, let's stay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Joe, let's stay there. That to me, that's part of why Dr. Paul Thigpen is here. Why, Dr. Paul Thigpen? Why does the aerospace industry not want to go there with this topic?
Well, the claims that are being made and have been made for a long time, and that I believe are true, is that ever since Roswell and perhaps before, so we're talking about beyond 75 years ago, that the government has recovered crashed UFOs, either intact or materials, and has been sponsored at least reverse engineering programs. And that for a long time, what they've done is kind of farmed that out, contracted with private aerospace industry to do the reverse engineering. So the private aerospace companies have the materials, and which according to these claims, and we've heard it for a long time, include bodies even of pilots of the craft, so that they have them and they're working on them secretly and that a big part of the black budget is going to them for that. One of the things that was interesting about AOC, that what is that last name? The last name is Cortez, but anyway, is that she's also on the committee that's looking into these audits where the DOD is, they haven't, I mean, it's been years, if ever, I think, since they've passed their audits, and there's all this money that's going places they don't know. She's kind of drawing the lines. Okay, maybe this is one of the places. But there are claims that the government actually DOD broke federal law by kind of choosing ahead of time, whether it's Lockheed or whoever it might be, we want you to do this, and so we're going to give you this material, and then you're going to be the one to give we're going to give the contract to, which is illegal to do that kind of plotting around. So the government then has plausible deniability. In fact, can kind of honestly say, when they've been asked in the past, is the government in somebody from DOD, is the government in possession of recovered craft materials? And they can say no, because they don't. The private aerospace has it. And of course, the advantage to private aerospace is there's all kinds of money to be made with these things if they're real, and they're reverse engineering them. And so that's why the aerospace industry doesn't want this information out. And
well, think about the technology that they would uncover.
Exactly.
Or
and have a monopoly on it. Have a monopoly on it. And the thing is, I must say, in fairness, there's the possibility that at least some of this stuff, we've heard rumors of this, that at least some of the stuff that the aerospace industry has itself funded this stuff to go out and recover it and bring it back without even involving the government. So in that condition, under that condition, that part you have to say, okay, do we really have the right to take it from them if they've done all the investment? But anyway, the thing is it's not just all speculation. The Congress, the legislation that has been passed, the legislation that's now an amendment to the Defense Authorization Act that has been passed by the Senate, I'm confident will be by the House, because they've been pretty behind it so far, is using the kind of language about what we have to tell, that a law saying that private industry now has to report to us whatever they've done in this regard. They use a couple of dozen times or something, use the technology, the verbiage non-human intelligence in this legislation. And the kind of details they have, like, okay, if they have it, we're calling eminent domain on it, that the government has to get possession of it. Why would the senators who propose this and the others have that kind of detailed legislation unless they know something and they know what they've got to go after?
Right.
It's not just a kind of general thing like, oh, guys, you got to talk about it. It's very specific. So all that, that says to me, yeah, they do a lot. We do a lot more than they've said. And the whistleblower, he said, I've been giving this to Congress for a couple of years now, this kind of stuff. So anyway, to answer your question about the aerospace industry, they have a lot to preserve, protect here.
Absolutely.
And, speculation that if the way these things move, I'm talking about the unknown craft, the way they move, they seem to break the laws of physics, but, I'm convinced they just are according to laws of physics we haven't discovered yet. Anybody who studies quantum physics, theory, they find that at the quantum level, all kinds of things are going on that don't fit the laws of physics as we know it. So it says to me, they just know something more than we do about the laws of physics. But at that level, if we were to reverse engineer what they're doing for propulsion and for energy production, that kind of thing, it could, it could put the fossil fuels industry out of business. And so I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not saying I know anything of this, but wouldn't be surprised if even oil and gas industry at some level, I'm not saying everybody who works in it, of course, but at the highest levels may also be putting pressure on Congress. We don't want this to be no, this is, this be bad.
But obviously, Paul, if you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, we have Dr. Paul Thigpen. We had him on a couple months ago discussing his book, Extraterrestrial Intelligence in the Catholic Faith. We highly recommend you get that. And we're going to get into a little bit of that later on in the discussion. But right now we're talking about the UFO congressional hearings. I'm going to hand this over to Joe, but just as a comment, imagine, I mean, I imagine the oil and gas industry, when you compare that to an energy source and a propulsion system that could take obviously intelligent life from someplace pretty freaking far away, okay? Because we can't see them. All right, we can't determine where they might come from. Obviously, that's something I think that's going to crush the fossil fuel industry. These guys could use a little humility. Maybe they should think ahead and figure out how they're going to get into that business.
That would be the thing. Say, okay, let's ride the wave of the next technology, right?
Well, if you're a good businessman, you anticipate these things and then you start to transition. Joe Rossinello.
Well, at first, I want to comment on what you said because I agree with it. I mean, there are definitely the powers that be. When you talk about the military-industrial complex, you mentioned Lockheed, you talk about the oil and gas industry, they give a lot of money to our government. I mean, and they don't give it, and this is bipartisan. They give it to both parties, and they don't give it because they like people. They give it because they want to get something in return. One of my biggest beefs with our government. So that's real. I mean, like what you're saying, that's not conspiracy. That's just a person looking at the reality of how power works and how our government works. And that's real. Any person who disagrees with that is not paying attention. That's point one. I think what you're saying is spot on. Point two, though, you mentioned something before the show I want to touch on. You mentioned about someone who is highly grounded in their Catholic faith, and this information kind of shook them a little bit. I want to talk about that for a moment, not specifically to the person, but in general, because there's a stigma around like saying, is this real? Is this not? And that was one of the things that came out of those hearings. They're trying to almost put a stigma on the person that say this could be possible. Why I say that is this, and this is where I'm going to go with this question. There are mysteries in this world. You see, too many times, you know, even as Catholics, and I fall prey to this, I know everything. I read it. And the truth is contained in the church. And this is, well, it is contained in the church. But there are things that are mysterious. Like, I don't know how a priest's hands consecrate the host. I can't write that down. I just know it happens. It's a mystery. Well, this is sort of like a mystery. And we don't know everything. We don't know how God operates. He's God and we're not. And there are some things we just have to accept as a mystery. And I think that's problematic for a lot of, maybe for a lack of a better way to put it, rigid people. You have to always keep your mind open to just simply say, you know something, Paul, I don't understand that, but I'm okay with that. Talk about that, because I think that's what's stopping some people from even considering the possibility.
Yeah, I mean, I get all kinds of pushback, you know, on the book. And it's, you know, I just show the cover there. One of the themes of the book is humility. You know, it talks about mystery and a sense of wonder, maintaining a sense of wonder. And how I define wonder is that's humility in the face of mystery, to be humble about the things we don't understand. But I mean, here's the situation. A lot of folks think that the Catholic faith denies the possibility of extraterrestrial intelligence, and a lot of them conclude from that, therefore, this is all demons. But the truth is, if you read the book, I think it makes a persuasive argument that that's not the case at all. The church has never made a clear position on that, but that the Catholic tradition, in particular, and the wider Christian tradition, for as long as it's been around, have had people taking this subject seriously. They've had come down on different sides, but I will say that almost everybody who came down on the side of, at least in the early centuries, came down to the side of no, there aren't. It was because they followed Aristotle's mistaken science that the Earth is the center of the universe. We have the moon and the sun and the stars, but no concept of a rocky planet where something could live. And so, he and Thomas Aquinas following him, well, we've got angels and humans here, with the exception, this is interesting too, that Thomas even, talked about this as a possibility that both Plato and Aristotle, the Greek philosophers they were drawing their science from, did think there was a form of ETI, extraterrestrial intelligence, and that they thought that the stars had souls, that the stars were actually animated, living, sentient creatures. So that doesn't fit our model, because now we know that there are planets out there. There are more than 5,000 exoplanets that have already been discovered and determined for sure. Who knows how many more? Millions, I'm sure. But But even they, were willing to allow that you'd have another kind of intelligence other than humans out there, and something other than angels. And then you have folks like St. Augustine and St. Jerome, who, again, working with that model, didn't think of planets where you could have things living, but who believed that there were other kinds of intelligence even on Earth. They believed in the existence of satyrs and see the Greek mythological figures. They thought they were real creatures that the Greeks wrongly worshipped, but that they were real. You get that in around the year 1700 from an exorcist, famous exorcist in Italy, Sinistrati, who says the same kind of thing, that we do exorcisms, and if it's really demonic, something's demonic, it has to submit to the name of Jesus, the sacraments, the sacramentals, the rite of exorcism. But there are other things we're encountering out there that don't submit. They're not demonic. There's something else. You get in the early 1900s, Father Herbert Thurston saying the same thing about exorcisms. So all I'm saying is that, first of all, if you know the history of Christian thought, Catholic thought in particular, you realize that there are faithful Christians who say, yeah, there could be other things out there. I think there are. I've demonstrated, some people have tried to question the sources, but there are 2 books in Italian that both attest, both of them written by one by spiritual son of Padre Pio. He would designate people as a spiritual son. One who was known as the favorite spiritual daughter of Padre Pio. Both of them saying that he once said, yes, there is extraterrestrial intelligence, and there are races out there, some that aren't even fallen, like we are. St. John Paul II. Oh, he was asked by a little girl one time in an audience, a public audience, what about aliens, Holy Father? And he didn't say, no, it's contrary to the faith. He didn't say, we don't know. He didn't say that's for science to discover. He didn't say, if they exist, then this. He said, always remember, they're God's children too. You've got Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, who in her visions saw extraterrestrial life out there, intelligent life. I could go on, but when people know that, it should open up for them, wait a minute, I shouldn't just say, contrary to all these other folks, there can't be anything else intelligent except for angels. It's only us, and we're alone with that, and it's contrary to the faith. Well, you're going to have to persuade, some of these people I've just mentioned, if you could talk to them, that, that they need tinfoil hats or something, because they're not on that side of the argument.
But Dr. Paul Thigpen, I mean, but as much as I believe and know, because the Catholic Church teaches that angels do exist, that does not, the two are not mutually exclusive. I could believe that angels exist, and I do, because I believe that the devil exists, okay, and Jesus tells us they exist, okay, and that it has no bearing. There may be, I believe there's fallen angels out there that are attacking human beings on a constant basis. Okay. Yep. That has nothing to do with, the other thing I was going to say to you is this, and then I want to get back to the congressional hearing. If you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, we're being joined by Dr. Paul Thigpen. Please go out and buy his book, Extraterrestrial Intelligence in the Catholic Faith. We're talking about the congressional hearings that happened last week, but I do want to make a comment before going back into it, Paul, is this, and I this is the way I see it. I think this should encourage people. St. Paul said that if Jesus Christ is not raised from the dead, then our faith is in vain and we're the most pitiable of men. And do I have that pretty much?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I believe that no matter what. There's evidence for it. That is the basis upon which I am a Roman Catholic, is that I believe Jesus is raised from the dead. I don't care if we get invaded by Martians tomorrow. I believe that, which is rooted in evidence and history. Yeah. And I believe that. I could see an alien. If there's an alien down the block, I also could see an empty tomb and all the other evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I just wanted to throw that out there. Okay. But let's, for a minute, Paul, let's get back. Because let's talk about technology. Okay. Mm-hmm. So one witness told the committee that the technology that they saw, all right, that they encountered defies logical explanation. All right. Talk about that a little bit, because, like you said, I want you to just elaborate more on the physics of it, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm thinking they were saying probably defies the laws of physics, or defies a prosaic explanation, in the sense that something we can easily explain. So you've got, in, say, the so-called Tic Tac incident, where you have off the coast of the United States, Navy pilots in a training area that's supposed to be off limits to everything else. these things coming in, they come in swarms. It's not just one of them. They come day after day after day for years, and they cannot make any sense of them because of the things they can do. First of all, I can say, and they're not some kind of radar blip, because they're seen, human eyes, they're seen on the radar, they're seen with the infrared detection systems they have. They have all these multiple sensory systems that all agree there is something there, and it's nuts and bolts. It's not just energy or apparition of some kind. And so you've got it on the other coast as well. So you've got things like that going on, and then they'll tell you this is what we saw and what we tracked. Number one, it's going at speeds of acceleration, multiple Mach speeds. That if it were our technology, first of all, we don't have anything that can go that fast, but it'll come that speed, it'll stop, instantly stop it, midair. They said if human beings weren't a craft like that, they'd be jello against the wall. We can't, can't even do that. But they'll stop like that, and then they'll make a right turn going at that kind of speed. And then they'll go from 80,000 feet in the air down to the surface of the water and into the water in a second. We don't have that kind of speed. We don't have things that are transmedium, which means that they can come, because 80,000 is the edge of outer space. They can come from outer space and, move around outer space, move around our atmosphere, and then move around in the water too. We don't have something at that speed. We don't have things that can make those kind of quick maneuvers at right angles. They appear and they disappear. And I mean, on all the sensors, everything just boom, it's there, and then boom, it's not. They show intelligent control in several of those cases. When one of the ones that Lieutenant Commander retired David Fravor was talking about, that the thing actually kind of was played around with. He's coming, he's going after it, and it'll go around him on either side, and do all these gestures as if to say, and to track him, as if to say he's played around with him. And by the way, if that particular one was hostile, they could have just taken him out. And that's one of the points that Fravor made, was that we don't have the ability to control these things. They're operating with impunity in our training spaces. They're all over the United States. They're associated with almost every nuclear facility of any kind that we've got, and nuclear ships and submarines as well. So those are the kinds of things that they say, and he said in the testimony, that we don't have anything like our adversaries. Terrestrial adversaries don't have anything nearly like that. We don't have the material science for something like that.
I was going to ask you, and then I'm going to hand it over to Joe, just on that level. I had made a point to a friend of mine that it was just a thought that popped in my head. I just want a brief answer. Paul Thigpen joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. We couldn't. My thought was that if the government is hiding something and it's not a UFO, if it's not extraterrestrial in nature, okay, is it possible that what the government has been doing for the last 70 years is developing technology that could perform these movements that these witnesses in front of Congress were talking about? So based on what I just heard you say, our technology could not have developed that fast just over 70 years.
Yeah. I mean, the way they describe it is this is multi-generational beyond us. You take it, technology has generations like we do, that we're not anywhere near, even starting with just the material. And the other things I should have mentioned is that also these things move without any signs of propulsion. So they don't move like our kind of propulsion technology. They're doing something else like anti-gravity, apparently. And the intelligent control, also want to mention that some of them began to jam the devices of the the folks that were tracking, and of the jet pilot coming after them, showing, intelligent control, the kind of things where they weren't just kind of blocking themselves, but they were sending out signals that would jam the controls that we had. So they're also under intelligent control. That's a really important thing.
That's it. It's mind-boggling to think about. But then again, that's why you're here, to try to uncloud things a little bit. Dr. Paul Thigpen, please go out and buy his book, Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Catholic Faith. Certainly, this is a topic that we as Catholics should be interested in. But if you're watching this, you don't have to be Catholic to listen to what Dr. Paul Thigpen is saying, because he knows a little bit something about this. Joe Rossinello, where do you want to go?
Well, you're talking about the hearings themselves. These are Top Gun pilots explaining what they saw. So I want to be clear on that this is what they stated. That's very important. And you're talking about technology, advanced technology. And I want to throw this at both of you. I think people's problem, and this kind of harkens back to what you said earlier about humility, scientists, they think that can't happen, so it did. Just because, I mean, like, if you look at how the world has progressed years ago, I could remember listening to a tape, like to listen to music, put a tape into a cassette player. Now music is just completely different. 40 years ago, we could never have imagined what we're doing now. Possibilities exist, but is it out of hubris that people are simply, the scientific community, pure hubris? I can't figure it out. I'm the smartest guy in the room. We have the best technology. This is doing this. I don't know how it happened. Therefore, it simply didn't exist. And I'm going to loop that into Jesus, to what Joe said. Jesus rose from the dead. A lot of smart people all over the world can't write that down, how that happened, but it sure as heck did. Is it out of hubris that people refuse to believe both? No, that scientific technology can't exist because I can't write it on a blackboard because I'm not smart enough to do it. Jesus rose from the dead. I don't know how it happened, so therefore it didn't. I think that's part of the stigma.
Well, I agree. And I want to say, first of all, I'm very happy that you have some scientists now who've gotten past that. The most famous one is Avi Loeb, who is, he's actually enough, a Jewish astrophysicist at Harvard, has been head of his department there earlier. And he has got a group of scientists from all kinds of places now who are studying this stuff on their own to kind of do an in run around the government, find their own evidence that they can examine. You've got several private organizations now, scientists are saying, we're going to study this stuff. The stigma is still there, though. And so you have to ask yourself, why is it that way? There's a man named Thomas Kuhn who wrote a book some years ago. And gosh, I can't remember the name of the book, but the thesis basically of it was that scientific progress, it will go sometimes, build on the foundation and you get a little better. But where it really makes its biggest advances is where you have what he calls a paradigm shift, where somebody kind of goes outside the box and says, no, it's this. And then they end up proving it, and it changes everything. Einstein was one of those, of course. That Newton had all kinds of stuff that helped us to understand the universe. But boy, in the end, there was a whole universe of stuff out there that he didn't know about. And that we're going through a similar thing now with quantum physics, where they're discovering that at least at the quantum level, the particle, subatomic particle level, there are things going on that don't seem to fit the laws of physics as we know them. You've got one set of rules that seem to work with quantum particles, and then the other set of rules that seem to work with these big things. So why, and Loeb himself, to his credit, he's always after the academic community saying the same thing. Guys, you've got to think out of the box. We're already finding that all these things are out of the box. Don't start out saying it can't happen because we don't know how it could happen. Look at the evidence. Let's look at the evidence. And I think especially we have to keep in mind that for science, often they say, okay, we have to have something in a lab, reproducible, all those things. That's understandable. But if that's the only thing we had to go on for what's true or what's not true, if we did not go on witness testimony, then first of all, our whole court system would fall apart. If somebody said, we have 100 people here who saw him do it. Well, I'm sorry, but if we can't measure in a lab, we can't accept that as evidence. We have to discount all that. History as a whole, history is built on testimony, right? Witnesses who have recorded things and told us. You'd have to rule out basically all of history, including if you ruled out first-person testimony as powerful evidence. As you said, the whole understanding of Christ rising from the dead and the rest comes from the first-person testimony of the apostles and others who not only said it, but died for it. And they wouldn't have died for a lie. They knew what they saw. You'd have to rule all that out if that's the only kind of evidence you're going to accept. So we also have to look at, and these things that we've got, in addition now to finally getting some mechanical or digital devices that observe these things, we've got the witness of thousands of people. It's been going on for a while. And so science, I think, has to allow for that. The other part that Avi Loeb talks about, and I've seen this, I used to be a professor and at several places, I won't say where I saw this most, but in one university I saw it in particular, that when, especially folks who have given their lives in academic world to a particular way of viewing things in science and other things too, when somebody comes out and challenges that, they usually react with, oh no, they dig in their heels. No, it cannot be. That's in science, that's in literary studies, that's in medicine, and all these things. Because if the new person with the new paradigm is right, then that makes obsolete your life's work. And so you have a vested interest in that. And you don't want to see them getting research grants to study something that might prove your work is on a faulty basis. So in addition to just kind of the closed-mindedness of it, there's a vested interest that also intensifies the resistance of the academic community to things that are going to break open the boxes.
You wish that scientific development didn't come down sometimes to just money. Like you mentioned, research funding.
So many things do.
I know, Paul. I mean, my father used to tell me all the time. He used to say, and I used to get mad at him because I didn't believe it. He said, Joey, look, when you want to understand why people do things sometimes, just understand first and foremost, just look for he would say, follow the money. He goes, look, remember Deep Throat from All the President's Men? Follow Hal Holbrook. Follow the money. Just follow the money, kid. And you know what? And more, the more I live, the more I just shake my head and say, yeah. A lot of people are just motivated by money. But let's get Paul Thigpen back to the congressional hearings for a moment. Let's talk about biologics. All right. And I noticed that word sounds very cryptic to me. But one former Intel official said that the U.S. recovered biologics from UFO crash sites. So what did they recover? What do they mean by that?
Yeah, I'd never heard that word, biologics, and looked it up. And apparently it has a technical meaning within medical science, of a medicine that has a biological origin or basis or component. So, some of the vaccines would be that you've used living things in order to make them. But I thought, okay, he's got to mean something more than that. But the truth is, before he ever had the hearing, back in June, he actually had an interview with News Nation. It's one of the new media TV that I'm so glad they've been cutting edge on this topic when nobody else, CNN, nobody else would touch it. And an interview that I think went a couple of hours, if I'm not mistaken. And in that, he mentioned specifically recovered bodies of the pilots of these craft. So that gives us a clue that maybe there's other stuff too, maybe just some kind of biological material. But he did say specifically there, these pilots had craft and we recovered the bodies. So that's what he's talking about. That much. He could be talking about other things as well. And that's been a part of the UF community's claim for ever since Roswell in 1947. I mean, it's should not be surprising to anybody who studied this that he would say, that's real.
Hey, look, if the object came to the Earth, then somebody had to bring it here. You know what I mean? Unless these intelligent, this particular intelligent species on a distant planet, maybe this is just a really highly developed drone that they sent from.
And then and people even who are deeply into this, they admit that some of them might be like a drone, or they might even have robots that are controlling them. They give the comparisons. Say, what if you would to explore in old time Papua New Guinea, where they would headhunters and kill anybody who wasn't one of them who came in, but you had drones. You probably send in a drone first instead of go there yourself and take that chance. So just the analogy makes sense. Some of them could be that, but according to Mr. Grush and so many before him, at least some of them have had basically alien pilots.
Okay. I want to make one quick point about paradigm shifts in the Catholic Church, and I'm going to hand it over to Joe. Just a quick point. The way I see it is this: the church is going to roll with science, and has done so. And when there is a paradigm shift, like when most people thought that the Earth was flat, all right, and then we found out it was not. And then when Copernicus, and I'm going to leave Galileo aside because I'm not going to get into that, but Copernicus was working obviously on the same thing Galileo was, which is heliocentrism. All right, the church said, Okay, because contrary to popular belief, Galileo did not get in trouble for proposing a heliocentric universe. Okay, he had other issues. Copernicus was doing the same thing. The church rolls with it. Even the church accepts some form, not the way it's proposed, some form of evolution. Okay, or at least it's not something that the church says you can't hold to. So the church rolls with science. And I want to make that clear because I have a lot of thoughts in my head about maybe writing a book and things like that and trying to set the record clear, set the record straight on how the church reacts to scientific development. And obviously, this is going to be a major development if this turns out to be that this is intelligent life from other planets. So I just wanted to quickly make that comment. You have a comment on that, Paul?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I've often people don't realize that before Copernicus, you had even had the ancient Greeks saying, "Oh no, the Earth is not the center." There was an ancient Greek philosopher who taught differently, but he got overruled by Aristotle, who's he had this Earth at the center and all these different levels, and that his philosophy, if you can call it science, won the day. And so it wasn't just that there were Christians opposed to that and Catholic leaders opposed to that. The scientists and philosophers of the day were opposed to that because everybody had assumed it to be the case for so long. And then finally, they begin to see through scientific observation, no, actually, that's not the case. Immediately, Catholic and other Christian theologians got on it and said, okay, let's explore that. And they ran with it. How about with the discovery of the New World? For the longest time, even if they thought the Earth was round, they would say, no, there's just this big ocean. And if you go there and keep going, you're going to get to the Indies, to the same continental mass that we have. And I mean, even Columbus apparently thought in the beginning, that's why he called them the Indies, because he thought it was the islands off the coast of India. And so they thought that, that was the case. And so when somebody would propose, and they did, even in St. Augustine's time, what if on the other side of the world, you got men who are alive and walking around, all that stuff. And St. Augustine, same thing. God bless him. He's really smart and knew so much, but based on the science of his day and the technology of his day, he said, no, there can't be men on the other side of the earth because if they're truly human, they have to be descended from Adam. And Adam was on this side. So we know that the expanse of ocean is such that it cannot be crossed. So therefore, they can't be there. Now, based on his science, that was good logic, but his science was limited. He didn't know, first of all, they didn't have ocean-going ships that could cross the ocean like Columbus did. And second, they didn't know about the land bridge that existed way back when, that people could just cross over on land even. So that's an example of what I'm talking about. And sure enough, when we did discover the New World, there were actually people who were claiming, some of them Catholics, I'm sure, that, what we've encountered there, they can't really be human. They can't, because they our whole paradigm has been, no, they can't be humans over there. They can't have gotten there from here. And some people use it to their commercial interests. They said, and therefore we can exploit them. Therefore we can enslave them, trade them, do all that, because they're not really human. And the Catholic Church had to come in and say, no, they are human. They are descended from Adam. They are related to us, and we need to preach the gospel.
Amen, so brother.
That's another example.
No. I'm glad you cleared that up. Joe Rossinello, where do you want to go?
That's a great example, actually, and it's real. I want to talk about, you mentioned some heavy hitters. Let's talk about governments. In 2011, the British Ministry of Defense released 8,500 pages on reports about UFO sightings dating back to the 50s. So we're not alone. I mean, the UK, developed nation, a lot of smart people in the UK, 8,500 pages, serious people talking about it. Expand on that, because I actually think that is also real evidence that's being put forth on this subject. Irregardless of where you stand on it, you should at least think about it.
Yeah, and if you ever hear Nick Pope talk, I don't agree with all his conclusions, but he used to be the UK's point man on UFO stuff for years, and he talks openly, about it now. He doesn't reveal any secrets, but you'll often hear people say, well, if this were real, it wouldn't just be the United States. Why is it always the United States? You just better do some more reading. You've got the UK, you've got Australia, you've got all kinds of things that have gone on in Iran. You've got them throughout Latin America, especially in Brazil, but other places as well. You have them in Africa. You have them in Europe. you haven't. We know that China, has had these things and probably has recovered stuff. We know for sure that Russia's had them and recovered them, because when the Iron Curtain finally fell down, and there was some openness before the new guys kind of came in to tighten things up and make it a little more totalitarian, not totally totalitarian, but more like it used to be. During that time, the same investigative reporter I mentioned, George Knapp, who'd been studying this thing for so long, he got over to Russia when everything was open, and was able to chase down a number of scientists and ask them, have you had anything like this? And they were free to talk because the old regime was gone and the new regime hadn't started yet. And they did. And they told just amazing stories about, similar to the ones in the United States, about UFOs coming over nuclear facilities and either shutting on or shutting off the missiles that were ready for launch. And so he brought back all kinds of files and information from them, showing that Russia's had a lot of stuff, and Russia has also had their own secret programs because of this. And almost certainly Russia has its own crash material that's been retrieved.
Why does this shake so many people, Paul Thigpen? Like, I can understand. Well, put it like this. The government wants to hide this information. That's obvious. They don't even want to talk about this. Everything that, let's say, has been produced from Roswell, like you said, and any of these things is, that's just conspiracy theory and blah, blah, blah. So we can assume that the government wants to hide this information. But let me ask your opinion, okay, Dr. Paul Thigpen. Why? What do you believe that they believe the reaction of people would be? To, let's say, if there was something more than just evidence, like proof, like actual proof that intelligent life exists on other planets.
Well, I think there are a whole number of reasons. For starters, our Roswell crash was during the Cold War. 47 war had only been over a couple of years, and the government. I mean, the first day the military folks said it is a crashed flying saucer. It was, and the news went all over the world. The second day they came back, oh no, actually it was just a weather balloon, which nobody involved with that, they knew it was not that. They would have known the difference between a weather balloon and a crashed saucer. But so starting the cover up then, and maybe even before, there may have been involved with one in Italy in 1933. But so the question was why, and we now have declassified documents through the Freedom of Information Act that tell us, some of the why. That there was a concern in the Department of Defense and the intelligence community that somehow the Soviet Union would take advantage of this situation if it were all public. That one thing that happened, we had several that were called flying saucer flaps that were happening. So, for instance, still during the war, a bunch of things flew over Los Angeles, and they had jets going after them, and the people just went crazy. Everybody, thousands of people calling into the lines, blocking on the emergency lines to report them. And then in the 50s, you had it with over Washington, D.C. People don't realize there were, I think, at least a dozen of these things that flew over D.C. and were hovering, and we sent jets after them, and it happened 2 weekends in a row. It was all in the papers. People don't know about that anymore. Those kinds of things brought fear, to the powers that be, that if people get on this wagon and every time something happens, they start jamming the lines, the Russians could use it as an opportunity to do something else. I won't go into all the details, but okay, you kind of understand that. In 1960, the Brookings Institute, a think tank, was hired to do a report to NASA and about this kind of stuff, all kinds of things. But one of it was about this in particular, one chapter. And it said then that we are concerned that if you get any information in the government about this being true, that there's non-human intelligence out there, that there'll be panic in the streets, that it could upset the whole society, especially people with religious beliefs, and it wouldn't be safe to do. And so therefore we recommend that if you have it, you keep it quiet, reveal it maybe to some scientist, study it, and you have to be careful about when or if you would ever reveal it. So right there, you already have this think tank. We know this, we have the document saying to the government, you need to keep it quiet. And then that continued. We have other documents coming out where they actually say at one point, we have got to keep the culture from believing this. It could cause trouble in different ways. We don't want them to know that we're not in control of the skies. And so we will use our connections in the media. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's what they're saying. Even then, use our connections in the media to get them to portray this as something to be dismissed and mocked. And that's how we'll keep it secret. Because there were whistleblowers, but as soon as what happened, government was successful. Whistleblowers come out, they say, get the news to the piece on the little green men, say, oh, those stupid people, they need tinfoil hats. And it worked, to a certain extent. Right. So they use those reasons. But again, beyond that, then just there would be fear. It'd be a matter of humiliation for them to admit these things are visiting our skies every day in even areas that we have restricted with impunity. They're moving around and doing things, and we cannot stop it. We don't even know who they are. We are not in control of our skies. That would be a hard thing, for them to admit. And then the other thing is, again, if they have farmed this stuff out to the industry, the aerospace industry, then along with the aerospace industry, they want to keep that quiet. This most recent whistleblower, David Grush, says that there have been crimes committed, and both white collar crimes, and he said people actually physically injured, and that he knows people who claim, and he sent them to the proper authorities, that people have been murdered to keep it quiet. If it's that bad, and stories have been like that for a long time. If it's that bad, then you've got the extra layer of people saying we don't want the world to know we actually committed crimes in order to keep this secret. And then it becomes a self-perpetuating thing. Even if we no longer have a Cold War, even if whatever, they'll say okay, well, if we have this craft, and they're not going to let the world know, because when you tell your friends, you tell your enemies, and we don't want China and Russia to know what we've got and what we're working on. Well, okay, didn't want to give details away, just like working on the nuclear bomb and the Manhattan Project. But to be able to make, general statements, yes, they're real, we're engaged with them, here's some pictures. And the other thing is that with Russian and Chinese espionage, they know what we're doing. Oh my goodness, they know what we're doing. So anyway, that's a bunch of stuff. But there are all these reasons. Every one of those could be one of the reasons why they've tried to keep it quiet and still are.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to rack my brain to think about what would motivate people to go into such a panic. Sometimes just on a different topic, sometimes when people get all bent out of shape, whether it was during the Cold War and they were worried about nuclear war and this like that, to me, it's like human beings are hopeless, and hopeless meaning seriously, like lacking hope. And I think that's why they fear so much. Look, we're all going to die. I like to tell people sometimes, whether I die because of an alien invasion, a nuclear war, or I get hit by a bus, or I just die naturally in my sleep, my end is coming at some point in the future. Okay. Yeah. When you have that attitude, and of course, when you're rooted in faith, all right, what do you want me to do? ET's coming. He's going to wipe us all out. They're going to take all the resources out of the earth and ship it back to planet X. I don't know, but to me, it's like there's a certain level of hopelessness that, unfortunately, that does scare me. Because people are capable of all sorts of crazy things. When you watch the movie War of the Worlds, the Tom Cruise movie, I think Steven Spielberg directed it. Shot on location in Newark, New Jersey, by the way. Really? Yeah, it was. You see, like he kind of like describes that in the film, that kind of like mass panic and everything else. But anyway, I go off on a tangent. Joe Ressinello.
Joe, you do realize you quoted from Predator, Arnold Schwarzenegger's movie about UFOs, when you said we're all going to die. Just so.
The funny thing is, I watched Predator the other day.
I just wanted to throw that at you, whether you realize it or not.
That's all right. That's all right.
Paul, I want to talk about our Catholic faith. You mentioned John Paul II, a great thinker. Let's just put it for our secular listeners who are listening to this. Not only is he a Catholic faith, he was a great statesman. He was a great thinker. And someone asked him, what if they were aliens? And he said, well, they are God's children too. How does such a reality not contradict our faith? Now I reference him because he's a great man. He's a brilliant man. He's a holy man. And he opens the question to thought. So clearly, if it was a problem, I think he would have addressed it on the spot. He's that type of guy. So say this is real. I love the example you gave about Augustine talking about, well, there can't be life in Samoa because we just don't know it or we don't see it. Well, it turns out there is life in Samoa, and they're children of God too. I love his response. I love that example. Why isn't this reality or idea of a potential reality a contradiction to our Catholic faith?
Great question. And so many people are saying that. And I just have to say, well, read my book, I'll go into it in detail. But here are the kinds of reasons given. So, and these reasons come not just from Catholics, but from people who are enemies of the Catholic Church. Thomas Paine, who wrote the tract that was so important in the American Revolution. He was a British guy, great thinker of the day in a lot of ways. I mean, people really respect him. He did a long essay on attacking the Christian faith. And he believed that extraterrestrial intelligence was real. I mean, as did Benjamin Franklin, as did John Adams, as did so many of the founders of our country, believed that it was real. But he said he would throw out, hey, it's not in your scripture. So this disproves your faith. Hey, it leads to so-and-so. This disproves your faith. You have others who've done that, for centuries. You get on the comm boxes of a piece right now about ETI being written by a Christian, and you have these skeptics on there say, well, don't you realize if this is true, it destroys your faith. When it's finally disclosed or revealed, we see them, all the world religions, they're done for, So it's a very real, argument.
Well, it sounds like the Neil deGrasse Tyson argument, arrogant scientist that he is. Like that's his argument, that if we just saw one alien, then he feels like justified in his attacks on religion because all those weak religious-minded people are all going to be wrecked. I just wanted to throw that in. Go ahead, Paul. You know me, Paul. I'm a troublemaker.
That's good. That's good. Yeah. So one of the reasons is it's not in the Bible that people have given. Well, simple reply to that is, well, neither are dinosaurs or microbes or ductile platypi, all kinds of things. It was not intended as a totally comprehensive scientific description of the universe. So that doesn't mean anything. Others, will try to claim then, okay, we have a special relationship with God, which is true, and especially because of the incarnation, other things. So if there were other sentient, intelligent beings, we wouldn't be special anymore. So I go back to St. Augustine again. He once said, God loves each one of us as if there were only one of us. That's the kind of love God has. And any parent of more than one child understands that sentiment. Your first child comes along, you're holding the baby, you're saying, oh, I love you so much. I could never love anybody as much as I love you. Then the second baby comes along, oh, I love you so much. I could never love anybody as much as I love you. As a parent, when you have multiple children, your love doesn't divide, it multiplies, right? And God, who is love himself, I mean, that's his nature. His love is infinite. It's the same way. He doesn't have to say, okay, well, now that I've got 3 intelligent races, I can only love each one 1/3. I can only say that only one of them is special and not the others. No, that's not the case at all. It shows more, if it's real, the truth, that just how great his love and creativity is. So that doesn't really work either, to say, well, we wouldn't be special anymore. Others would say, in particular, that the Catechism denies, that's exactly how it's been put, the Catechism denies extraterrestrial intelligence. Categorically, no, I'm sorry. The same passages that they'll go to try to prove that, I've already dealt with in my book and shown that those passages have to be looked at in the context of passages around them. So that when the passage talks about how we're the only one and the only creature in the image of God, and then a few sentences later it says on earth, the only ones on earth in the image of God. There are Bible verses like that some people have tried to pull out. And I show, and the way I do it is not just by my interpretation, but especially with the Bible verses. I'll go back and say, okay, how did St. Thomas see this? How did, the church fathers see this? When it talks about all creation, so and so, okay, does that mean the whole universe? Does it mean just the creation on earth? And you go back and you find out the church fathers, at least some of them said, no, it just means, limited reference. Or when it says all, does it mean without exception? You go back and you find out Thomas and others say, no, it could have just been dealing with this portion, that kind of thing. So that there's really nothing that I can find in scripture or in the catechism that rules it out. But more importantly, number one, the church has never made a definitive statement on this. Catechism is not that statement. How do I know that, that my interpretation, or at least of the possibilities of the catechism, is true and the other one is not? It goes back to John Paul II. Which pope was it that gave us that catechism? Which pope was it that wrote the introduction recommending it heartily? Which pope was it who would have known the contents of that catechism better than anybody else and known the right way to interpret those passages? And that pope was the one who said to the girl, they're all God's children. He didn't say, if he, knowing the catechism as he did, if he knew that the catechism denied the reality of extraterrestrial intelligence and he believed it himself, there's no way he would have misled that little girl and said they're God's children too. He would have said, and he could have said it, gently. Actually, our faith teaches us there are no such things. We won't find anything. He didn't even say science, we'll have to wait for science to tell us. He didn't even say, well, we don't know. He actually made a positive statement. Always remember they're God's children too. So I'm sorry, but I'll go along with his interpretation of the catechism over somebody else who's trying to interpret it in what I consider kind of a fundamentalist way, where it's totally tone deaf to context and to scope of what's being talked about.
I also just think too, it's mystery. Like I think of some of the saints, like I'm going to reference three: Francis, Dominic, and Ignatius Loyola. Each went about living a very holy life very differently, different from the way that people understood the life of the church. Dorothy Day, another person who, in my opinion, was a very radical woman, controversial, but I think she'll be canonized. So it's a mystery. God works in a mysterious manner. I think when we are now I'm not talking about teaching and dogma. So if anyone hears this, please don't misunderstand me, because I believe what the church teaches, everything, but I don't know the mind of God. And I'm not going to pretend like I do. And I think the trap that people fall into is when somebody presents something, as you are, in a sense, Paul, they immediately shoot it down. Like as the lives of saints presented a manner in which Christ walked and taught, many people immediately shot it down. But history proved them to be on the right road, and the naysayers are forgotten. I want to just emphasize that, because mystery is a part of the life of God, and we are limited. He is not, and people should always keep that in mind. That's my comment. You both could comment on it, but I think that's where I think some people are too quick to just say, can't happen. Well,
let me piggyback on that a second. I want to throw this over to Paul. Joe's talking about I'm hearing assumptions. There's always assumptions, right? And if your assumption is challenged, and it's dismissed. Here's an assumption, okay, that I'm sure many atheist scientists seem to hold, that somehow, some way, that if we were to encounter extraterrestrial life that came down and they got out of one of these ships, said, hi, how you doing? Let's say we assume we could communicate on some level. How do you know they're not going to turn around and say, hey, by the way, do you guys believe in God? Because we do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Why isn't the assumption is if that they're intelligent, they don't believe in God? Please, I'm not wrong about that. I'm not wrong about that, Paul. I bet you, without knowing it 100%, that if you asked Lawrence Krauss and Neil deGrasse Tyson and any other atheist scientists out there to say, why do you assume, or do you assume that these extraterrestrials would necessarily not believe in God? They would say, yeah, they don't believe in God. So you know where I'm going with that, Paul. I love your comments.
Yeah. I mean, it's been called the ETI myth by Christians looking at this, that you have people, often scientists, atheists, who just assume that religion is part of this ignorant thing, characteristic of humans, and that I'll actually say I won't say her name, but someone associated very prominently with SETI, the group that's trying to find some kind of radio waves or something from other planets to demonstrate that there is intelligent life out there. I mean, she actually said in an essay that so I assume that when we encounter them, if we did, that they wouldn't have religion, they would have outgrown that. And
sounds like a typical atheist.
Just said, I don't know that she's an atheist, but it's just that the way she put it was that, basically, like everybody knows, that they would have outgrown religion, because on our planet, religion is the source of all this conflict and stuff, and they would have had to outgrow it if they lasted long enough to get the technology they've got, because they would have killed themselves if they'd had religion. I just want to say, let's start with the whole idea of a hospital. Let's start with, education. Let's do all these things that the Catholic Church founded, and let's look at Stalin and Mao, the big time atheists. What kind of, how many people did they kill? Come on, what a prejudiced view and,
Yeah.
a narrow view, refusing to look at anything that organized religion has done, and to assume that if we met aliens, they would have left that behind a long time ago.
Right.
So I'm saying I've seen exactly that kind of attitude, and it makes no sense at all. You have people like C.S. Lewis, great Christian writer, not Catholic but very close to it, and some of the fiction he wrote, and other things, just said, yeah, we can run into races that haven't fallen and therefore have a natural knowledge of God and friendship with Him, the way Adam and Eve did before the fall. And in fact, that's what Padre Pio said. That he was certain. I mean, he was very adamant about it. There are other races out there that haven't fallen as we have, and they give greater glory to God than we do because of it. It's come on, guys. I mean, and with Padre Pio, the interesting thing is that we're not just talking about some saint who never had a supernatural revelation. I mean, Padre Pio was revealed things God revealed to him that no one else knew. I mean, he did what some people call remote viewing. He could see things at a distance without, the physical vision. He would read souls. He would know future events, those kinds of things, because God revealed them to him. So if I had been the person asking him that question, I would have right away said, because he's just saying, oh, yes, they're out there and they're this. I would have said, Holy Father, is this your conviction? Or not Holy Father, but just Father. Is this your conviction because of, what you believe and what you've known, or did God reveal this to you? Man, that would have been the question to ask. Of all people, Padre Pio, maybe God revealed it to him. I can't say, of course. Maybe, but even if he just came to this conclusion because of everything he knew about the faith and everything he knew in life and about all the mysteries, it's still a very powerful thing we have to think about. It doesn't prove that they exist, that he believed it, but it does show that you can be a faithful, well-catechized Catholic, close to God, hearing all kinds of things from God, and still believe firmly in extraterrestrial intelligence. It was not contrary to his faith.
Paul, you just got done saying a little while ago here, Paul Thigpen, if you're just joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe, we're discussing the UFO congressional hearings. We're discussing a lot of things, really. Paul's book, which is Extraterrestrial Life in the Catholic Faith. Please go out and buy that. But you were describing a world earlier, Paul, where I think there is a legitimate parallel. You're talking about, let's say, for argument's sake, late antiquity, early Middle Ages. You had Europeans and everybody on that continent thinking that was the world, that was it. You know what I mean? And if you're not, and there are no other human beings. Well, what's the difference between what did the Catholic Church do? Okay, other than, let's say, when the explorers went out, the church said, "You're taking the church with you." Okay, and the church went out with them, all right? And what did they do? That when they found out there was people in other parts of the world, they baptized them. They baptized the indigenous people. They baptized the Indians in Canada and in America. That's what so they traveled an ocean of water. What's the difference if you travel an ocean of space and do the same thing? Or someone travels an ocean of space and they get here and the church says, do you believe in Jesus Christ? And again, I know I'm being a little simplistic, but we've been through this before. That's my point. We went into the unknown. We found people that we didn't think were there, and we baptized them, and they became Catholic. So this is not shocking to us.
Yeah, and even, I mean, like I said, there were people who wanted to claim, usually for commercial reasons, but based on the attitude that, well, if we find beings there, they can't be human, can't be descended from Adam, then there's something subhuman, and therefore we can treat them like cattle. We can just enslave them, make them work until they die, whatever. And the Pope had to come out, with a statement saying, no, they are human. They're descended from Adam. We're part of the same family, and we're bringing them to faith. Now, I'm not saying that about aliens because, it'd be hard to imagine how they would be descended from Adam.
Right.
But I go through those possibilities in my book. If they're not, then that means they may not have original sin. They may have never fallen the way we have. There's some people who want to claim, kind of quasi-Christian that, well, since we're fallen, all the other intelligent species would have to be fallen too. It's just inherent in our nature. No, the church would say that's not necessary. You're saying that Adam and Eve had to sin? No, they really did have free will. and they sinned, and God was able to make something greater out of it. They didn't have to sin. It wasn't part of their nature. So
Right.
there could be races out there that, I mean, once you get past the thing of understanding the church does not deny the possibility of their existence, then you start thinking about the possibilities. And that's one of them. They weren't befallen. Or they could be fallen and God could have another plan for them. I mean, St. Thomas Aquinas, you go back to him a lot in these issues. I do. And he said, even on earth, I mean, he wasn't talking about aliens, but on earth, the question was, did God have to have the incarnation and all that in order to redeem us? He said, no, God's God. He could have had another plan. This is the one he chose. It must be most fitting for us. But he could have redeemed us in a different way. Well, if that's the principle, he could do it with, with the aliens as well.
As you were talking, it reminded me of a Protestant argument that basically, with regard to Mary, what they say is if she was immaculately conceived, she would not need a savior. And along the lines, but what I would say is God operates outside of the realm of time. If he could save us who were fallen, he could surely preserve Mary from ever being fallen. You see, again, we're putting him in a box. God is God. And he could do anything. He operates outside of time and space. And again, please, no one out there, all the crazy people who saying now Joe is denying Catholic faith. I am not. I believe in everything, but I also believe I'm not God. And I try to keep my mind open. And I think that's important to be truthful with.
Yeah, I mean, Catholic faith affirms that the only things God cannot do are, one, anything contrary to his nature. That's why we would say God cannot lie. And number two, anything that is in itself inherently not impossible. So the old thing of, well, can God make a rock so big that he can't pick it up? No, that's an inherent, I mean, that's just basically babble. It's not even a logical statement. So those are the two things. And so part of what you have to do is say, okay, what is the nature of God? What's contrary to the nature of God? What seems in keeping with the nature of God? And one of the oldest arguments in the Christian community for this is that the world we do know has life in every little nook and cranny. There's things that live in volcanoes. There are things that live down in the depths of the ocean where no sunlight ever gets. There are things that live in extremely hot springs. They're called extremophiles, and I think that's what they're called. But so what was this? I can't remember his first name now. He's a former director of the Vatican Observatory. Most people don't realize the Vatican's got an observatory of professional astronomers who've been responsible for all kinds of contributions to science. It goes back to this, centuries. They even, and then have, so they have their own telescope and stuff, their observatory, but also work with one in Arizona. And the former director of that, his last name is Funes. He's a Jesuit priest and astronomer. And, he just said, if you try to say this can't be, you're trying to put a limit on the creative power of God. You can't do that. Right. And in the end, that's been the old argument, this called the argument of plenitude. God seems to fill things with life. Why wouldn't he fill things with life out there?
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out. Paul Thigpen joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe is like you said, every nook and cranny of this earth has life. The universe is very, very big. God created the universe. God is the source of all. He's the ground of all being. What makes you think there wouldn't be some, again, not necessarily intelligent, but to say that there's life on other planets, I think that's a no-brainer. No, again, I'm not saying intelligent life. I'm saying just like amoebic life, microbial life. There's got to be life all over the universe. Like you said, there's extremophiles in a freaking volcano. All right. So like Joe said, Joe made a very good point. Stop putting God in the box. God does what he does for us, in our little time here in human history. And whatever else he does, you know what? Sometimes you want to just say, mind your business, let God do what God does. Paul, we're going to put a little capper on this. We don't want to keep you much longer. Paul Thigpen joining us here at the front line with Joe and Joe. We'll give you an opportunity, Paul, just at the end to let people know where they could buy your books and learn more about you and what you got going on. Talk a little bit, just very quickly, finally. Do these hearings validate many of the claims that you made in your book about extraterrestrial life and the Catholic faith, or did you think maybe they detracted from? How does it pertain? How did these hearings? Let's say, what is your view from the author of that book?
Yeah, I wrote the book as an apologetics text to help Catholics understand. It makes no particular claims, the whole book, the main book about UFOs. It makes the claim that it's not contrary to our faith. And if we should have a discovery or disclosure of it, it does not undermine our faith. So that's the point of the book. That's why I do all the history. That's why I do all the theology in the second section. And so even if, and I make the point there, even if every occasion of UFO could be conclusively demonstrated, which you can't, to not be anything, to only be prosaic stuff, everyday stuff, that would still not undermine the book. The book says that whether, that the possibility fits in our faith, and we shouldn't be surprised if it happens. But my publisher, God bless him, he's a good friend, he and my editor agreed. They said, Paul, anybody who reads this book, they're going to want to know what you think about UFOs, not just the possibility of ETI out there, but UFOs. So I said, okay, I'll make it as an appendix at the end, so my main argument doesn't depend on what I'm thinking. And that I talk about kind of stuff that, the claims have been made, the things we've read and heard for a long time. And I say in there that I think it's probable that at least some of the things we're seeing are extraterrestrial, but there could be other things too. Some of them demonic, like I said. So I don't think the hearings would probably strengthen that conclusion in the appendix, that we've got even more evidence, it seems to me clearer, that the things are real and that they're not demonic, especially if they're traveling around in crafts and have bodies. Angels don't have bodies, they don't travel in craft. So that would give more strength to it. But again, the main point of the book is not to try to prove UFOs are extraterrestrial or anything else. It's to say, hey, if we find out it is, God's all powerful, God's all creative, they're God's children too. Let's don't let it threaten our faith, and don't let others, try to convince us that it threatens our faith.
There you go. And that's a great place to leave the conversation, Paul. This has been fascinating. Really has. And we're so grateful to you for coming on the show. So let our audience know, Paul, where they could learn more about what you have going on, purchase your books, more importantly, and so any social media.
Sure. Yeah. The only social media I have is a Facebook page. I just haven't got involved in a lot of the others. But the books, most of my recent books, probably the last couple of dozen, have been published by Tan Books. So you can find them all online at tanbooks, TANBOOKS.com. And, but you can also find them at your local Catholic bookstore. I hope at least this one is. And if you have to, you can get them on Amazon. I always encourage people to go straight to the publisher first, or the Catholic bookstore if you can. I have a bio.
Because I think that's one of the main things, and Joe and I having on the show is because sometimes, the perception of the Catholic Church and Roman Catholics in particular is skewed. And that has a lot to do with atheism. That's a conversation you and I and Joe will get in another time about how they portray the Catholic Church as being backward thinking. And that's why we're very happy to have you on to show, the average Joe out there that, hey, no, this is not what the Catholic Church thinks. We're thinking individuals. God gave us reason, intelligence, and free will. And we use those gifts, both as individuals and as a church. So we're very, very grateful, Paul. And obviously, needless to say, you're welcome to come back here anytime to discuss anything you want.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such an honor to be with you. You're both, full of energy and full of engagement. And that means so much to me.
Have my coffee.
You also let the people you interview give talk. I've had interviews before; they do all the talking. I just said, "Oh, why am I here?" But
well, anyway, that's not easy for a couple of goombas from New Jersey like us. I got to tell you, because the word in Italian, Paul, is chiacchierone. Okay, that means you're a talker. Joe and I are two chiacchierones. So to keep our mouth shut means you have something important to say.
But in all honesty, Paul, we learn from our guests. We're not going to pretend like we know everything. Yeah. We're privileged to talk to people like you. That's how I look at the role that I'm in, that I've been, for lack of a better way of saying it, called to. We learn from you, and that's why we listen. And to be honest with you, we're blessed to have you.
Well, thank you. And that's a sign of your humility to say that. I always go back to Augustine so much. Somebody once asked St. Augustine, what's the most important, virtue? And, or what are the three most important things of the spiritual life or virtues or something. But anyway, his answer, it's in my book. His answer was the three most important are humility, humility, and humility. And it's true. We've got to have the sense of wonder, this humility in the face of mystery that Job had. I mean, that's the other thing. People have commented before that some folks were rejecting in history, rejecting all this because they basically, in the back of their mind, their God was the God of Aristotle. And they said what they should have done is look to the God of Job instead, where Job thinks he's got things figured out. He has certain assumptions. And the Lord comes back and says, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Where were you when I scattered the stars out and put the constellations in place? And do you know the ordinances of the heavens? In other words, do you know the rules, the laws by which the heavens work? And Job just said, oh, sorry. I'm so sorry, Lord. I repent in dust and ashes. That's got to be our attitude. We don't know all the ordinances of the heavens that he's.
I'm so glad you brought that up because, again, real quick, we won't belabor it, but that's another misconception. Like people, they talk about Job. Oh, Job's about patience. No. What you just described, that whole book of Job is about just what you just said. It's God's response to Job is the most important lesson of that book. Where were you? Who are you? Where were you? Anyway, we got to leave it there. Paul Thigpen, thank you, brother. And wherever you see in this video, please share it. Share it on Facebook. Share it on Twitter. Share it on YouTube. Share it all over the place. This is a great conversation. Anyone, not just Catholics, anyone can be enlightened by Dr. Paul Thigpen. So, Paul, thanks again for coming by. I know you're going to be back soon. And remember out there that our conversation at the front line with Joe and Joe is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We'll talk to you soon.